I came to the Arkansas River Valley, chasing silence. After 22 years in uniform, half of them deployed overseas, thought I had earned a little corner of the earth where the loudest sound would be cattle lowing at dawn, or the wind dragging itself across the grass. That was the dream I bought with every scraped dollar. A modest ranch on the edge of La Junta, Colorado. 40 acres of stubborn pasture, a squat farmhouse with weathered siding, and a strip of land that touched the county road like a lifeline. I still remember my first morning there. Steam lifted off my coffee, the porch boards creaked beneath my boots, and the light came slow and gold over the eastern rise. My herd, just 30 Black Angus, each tagged and known, spread across the pasture like living punctuation marks. For the first time in years, I wasn't listening for mortar or radios. Just birds. Just breath. It didn't last long. One March morning, 6 weeks after I moved in, I stepped outside and froze. A gleaming new fence stretched across the southern edge of my land, right where my access road cut toward the highway. It wasn't mine. The posts were still raw, dirt-mounded where augers had chewed. At the center, a steel gate, thick as a prison door, secured with a brand new padlock. A sign dangled from it in reflective paint: Property Access Managed by Coyote Ridge, HOA. My herd had gathered near the line, pressed together, uneasy, as if they too understood something had changed. Beyond the fence shimmered the creek, the one steady water source for my south pasture. The fence hadn't just hemmed me in, it had cut them off. I set my mug down on the porch rail and walked every step heavier. By the time I reached the gate, 2 men in HOA polo shirts were tightening bolts. "Morning," I called, voice even. "Mind telling me what this is?" Neither met my eyes. One muttered, "Talk to the board." And then she arrived. Bethany Sloan, president of the Coyote Ridge Homeowners Association, rolled up in a spotless silver SUV. She stepped out like she owned the ground under her heels, sharp suit jacket, hair lacquered against the wind, clipboard tucked like a weapon. "Mr. Carter," she said, not bothering with a greeting. "You've been notified of your non-compliance issues." I frowned. "Non-compliance with what?" "Perimeter fencing must match community standards," she replied briskly. "Yours does not. Until corrected, this measure will prevent further violations." I glanced at my herd, then back at her. "This measure just cut off my access road. My cattle need that creek, and for the record, that I pointed to the gate isn't your land." Her smile thinned, sharp as a blade. "The access easement is controlled by the HOA, it's in the covenant you agreed to when you purchased." I thought back to the mountain of papers I had signed at closing. Clauses buried like landmines in legal jargon no ordinary man could pass. My stomach tightened. "You mean to tell me you can just lock me in until I change my fence?" "You can contact our office when you're ready to discuss the approved style," she said smoothly. "Have a pleasant day." The gate clanged shut. The padlock clicked, and she drove off, the 2 workers leaving without a word. I stood there for a long moment, hands on hips, wind tugging at my shirt. I'd faced down men who wanted me dead, sat through dust storms in desert valleys, but I had never seen arrogance turned into steel and bolts quite like this. That night, I sat across the kitchen table from my neighbor, Glenn Porter, a retired trucker with a voice like gravel and the patience of a man who'd seen too many way stations. "They've been pulling this for years," Glenn said, sipping his coffee. "Bethany's got the board wrapped around her finger. If she don't like you, she'll make your life miserable." I shook my head. "I didn't come out here to get pushed around by a committee." "Then you better be ready for a fight," he said. "She sure as hell ain't giving you that key unless you play her game." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I didn't know yet how far it would go. But I knew one thing with certainty. This land wasn't just dirt and cattle. It was the promise I'd built my second life on, and I wasn't about to hand it over. The next morning, I drove into town and bought a thick file folder. Every letter, every notice, every photograph of that fence line, I started collecting it all, because if Bethany Sloan wanted a fight, she'd get one, and this time, I wouldn't be carrying a rifle. I'd be carrying the truth. 2 days after the fence went up, I found myself walking into the Coyote Ridge clubhouse for my first HOA meeting. The building smelled of burnt coffee and old carpet, the kind of place where small power thrived in fluorescent lighting. Every chair was filled. Neighbors sat stiff in folding seats, murmuring about pool hours, mailbox paint, and lawn heights. It was small-town democracy dressed up as bureaucracy, and at the head of the long table sat Bethany Sloan, navy blazer immaculate. A necklace flashing like a badge of office, she spotted me instantly. "Mr. Carter," she said into the microphone before the meeting even began. "You'll be on the agenda under compliance matters." Her tone made it sound like a sentencing, not a discussion. The first 40 minutes were a blur of trivial grievances, arguments over Christmas lights, disputes about basketball hoops. I sat in the back, packet in hand, flipping through page after page of rules, exterior paint colors, driveway length, even the height of porch lanterns. It felt less like a community and more like a boot camp where creativity was the enemy. Finally, she called my name. My boots echoed on the tile as I walked to the front. I could feel every eye on me, some sympathetic, others wary. "A few cold. Let's talk about that fence," Bethany began. "It's the same design I had on my previous property," I said evenly. "It's functional. Keeps my herd safe. That's the purpose of a fence." "Functional isn't the standard here," she replied smoothly. "Community aesthetics are. Perimeter fencing must be uniform, and yours does not meet specifications." I opened the folder I had carried in. Photos of my herd, copies of deeds, records of my conversations. This is a cattle ranch, not a golf course. The fence is built for livestock, not for decoration. And, by the way, that padlock you installed cut off my access to the creek. That's not just inconvenient, it's dangerous. My cattle need that water. Her lips twitched, a fraction of a smile. "You have other sources. Our review of satellite imagery confirms it." I let out a humorless laugh. "Satellite imagery? You think a photograph from space tells you how I run my herd? You've got no idea." A murmur rippled through the room. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Glenn Porter, sitting in the second row, raised his hand. "Bethany, the man's been here barely 2 months. Maybe we give him some breathing room before locking his gate like a criminal." Bethany didn't even look his way. "The HOA must maintain standards, Mr. Porter. If Mr. Carter wishes to remain here, he'll comply like everyone else." I leaned in, meeting her gaze. "And if I don't?" Her eyes glittered. "Then fines will continue. And, if necessary, legal action." I turned and walked back to my seat. Inside, though, something hot and coiled burned in my chest. I wasn't just being policed, I was being boxed in. And the eyes that followed me back down that aisle weren't just watching a man with a fence problem. They were watching a newcomer, a black rancher in a town that still hadn't decided if he belonged. After the meeting, a few neighbors slipped over with murmured words of encouragement. But they glanced toward Bethany before stepping away, like kids caught whispering in church. Others avoided me altogether. Fear had been woven into this community, strand by strand. And Bethany wore it like armor. Outside in the parking lot, Glenn caught up. "She's not just strict, she's got ties. Cousin on the zoning board, brother-in-law in real estate. Folks around here think twice before crossing her." I looked back at the clubhouse windows, where I could see her inside, shaking hands with a tall man in a suit, both smiling like they'd just closed a deal. "I'm not playing her game," I said finally. "If she wants a fight, she'll get one, but not the kind she's ready for." Over the next week, the war came by mail. My mailbox looked like a courthouse drawer, thick envelopes, stamped compliance notice. The fines started at $50 a day, then doubled. Each letter was couched in polished language. Visual inconsistency detrimental to community appeal. I read the words aloud in my kitchen, shaking my head. Visual inconsistency. I'm raising cattle, not hosting weddings. Glenn sat across from me, sipping black coffee. "They're doing it on purpose. Bleed you with paper until you fold." But folding wasn't in me. Not after all the things I'd survived. Not after all the ground I'd fought for. So when the next meeting rolled around, I didn't come to argue. I came to listen. to study their rhythm, to learn where the cracks might be. This time, a neighbor named Paula Green stood at the front, voice trembling as she complained about a tree the HOA had forced her to cut down. She glanced at me mid-sentence, then quickly looked away. The board dismissed her concerns with the same polished indifference they had shown me. By the time they adjourned, I saw it clearly. This wasn't about rules, it was about control. A culture built on fear, fines, and the weight of silence. And standing there in the parking lot, watching Bethany's SUV roll out, I made myself a promise: I would not be their silence. The real breaking point came on a windy Thursday morning. I had been up since dawn, fixing a trough pump near the north pasture, when I noticed my herd clustered near the new perimeter fence. They were restless, pacing, heads pointed toward the creek. I followed their gaze, and my stomach dropped. The fencing now stretched clear across, cutting off the only reliable water source on that side of the property. I tossed my gloves on the dirt and climbed over the fence, boots thudding against the hard ground. The padlock on the gate gleamed in the sun, smug as a jailer. I rattled it hard, the clanging echoing across the pasture. No answer, no movement. Just that silence that feels like mockery. By mid-morning, I was on the phone with the HOA office. I need access to that creek immediately, I told the receptionist. My herd can't be cut off from water. This is basic animal welfare. Her voice was clipped, bored. Mr. Carter, the HOA has confirmed there are other water points on your property. Backup tanks, I snapped. Temporary at best. You want dead cattle on your hands. I can forward your concern to the board, she replied, but I can't authorize access. That afternoon, I drove straight to Bethany Sloan's immaculate home white siding, hedges trimmed sharp, the kind of house that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover for people who had never lifted a shovel. She opened the door wearing a pale blouse, her expression polite but firm, like she was expecting me. This isn't about fines anymore, I said, voice low but steady. You're cutting my herd off from water. That's cruelty. Her reply was smooth, practiced. Mr. Carter, the HOA operates under a uniform standard. If we make exceptions, it undermines the integrity of the community. The integrity of the community. My voice rose. We're not talking about lawn ornaments. We're talking about living animals. My livelihood, my family's future. Her eyes didn't blink. The rules are the rules. I stepped back, fists tight to keep from saying what I wanted to. This isn't over, Bethany. As I walked away, I caught the flick of curtains from 2 houses down. Neighbors peeking, watching. It wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a spectacle. 2 days later, stress began to show in my herd. A few cattle bellowed toward the creek, frustrated. I hauled extra water tanks, sweating under the sun, straining muscles I thought had toughened in war. It was exhausting, expensive, unsustainable. Glenn came over one afternoon, leaning against my truck as we rolled another tank into place. She's playing hardball, he said, voice heavy. Trying to wear you down. She's not winning, I grunted. Not now, not ever. But even as I said it, the toll weighed on me. By the end of that week, I was running on little sleep, juggling ranch chores with the flood of compliance notices. One letter had a photo taken from the rotorshot of a tilted water tank. The note claimed it was a safety hazard and demanded immediate correction. That's harassment. Glenn muttered after reading it. That's Bethany. I replied, and then came the twist I hadn't seen coming. One morning, I found a for sale sign hammered into the small half-acre lot that contained the gate. A narrow strip, just gravel and scrub, but the choke point for every vehicle, every delivery, every person entering my ranch. Whoever owned it controlled the lifeline. I stood there staring, the gears turning. If I bought that strip, I'd own the gate. And if I owned the gate, Bethany's power vanished. But I knew this: if she caught wind of my plan, she'd move faster than lightning to stop me. So whatever came next had to be quiet, swift, ruthless. That afternoon, I drove into town and sat across from Tom Beard, a local attorney with gray hair and a handshake that had seen its share of courtrooms. His office smelled like paper and dust. I spread out the letters, the photographs, the latest finds. I want to know if what they're doing is even legal, and if I buy the land with that gate, do I control it fully? Tom adjusted his glasses, scanning. They're operating inside the covenants you signed, he said finally. That's the bad news. Those documents give the HOA more control than most realize. But if that parcel truly is separate from their holdings, then yes, you'd have full legal rights. You'd need to move fast though. Keep your name out of it, meaning Bethany couldn't know it was me, so I called an old friend, Marcus Reed, a buddy from my unit who now ran a property management company a couple of counties over. Marcus set up an LLC under his firm, a shell with no trace to me. The LLC would buy the strip. My name wouldn't appear until the ink was dry. For the next week, I carried on like nothing had changed, fed the herd, hauled water, waved at neighbors. But at night, I drew maps of the property, studied easements, and planned every angle. One evening, Glenn stopped by, cooler in hand. He found me hunched over county plat maps. "You're cooking something up," he said with a grin. I looked up. "If I told you, you'd have to swear it stays between us." "My lips are sealed," he said, so I told him. And by the time I was done, Glenn was grinning wider than I'd ever seen him. "That's bold," he said. "And I like it." Meanwhile, Bethany must have sensed something shifting. She started showing up near the gate more often, sometimes with 2 board members in tow. They'd stand there, talking in hushed tones, casting glances my way. One afternoon she strolled over, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Carter," she said, "we've scheduled another compliance inspection for next week. I didn't look up from the fence post I was repairing. You can schedule all you want. The fence isn't changing." Her smile was ice. "You're only making things harder on yourself." I stood, meeting her gaze head, "And you're underestimating me." For the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not fear exactly, but uncertainty. And I knew then, this wasn't just about fences or fines. This was about control, and she was about to lose it. The closing date landed on a grey Tuesday morning, the kind of day where the sky sagged low and heavy, but the rain refused to fall. I dressed like it was any other jeans, worn thin at the knees. Boots dusted from the pasture, a plain button-down that still carried the scent of hay. Nothing about me looked like a man about to wage war in a courthouse, and maybe that was the point. I drove into Abilene, parking behind the title company's brick office, where the blinds rattled softly in the wind. Marcus was already inside, sipping burnt coffee from a styrofoam cup, flipping through the paperwork with the ease of a man who had danced with bureaucracy 1,000 times before. "Morning," he said with a grin. "Ready to make life complicated for your friend Bethany?" I smirked. "Let's just get it done." The process was straightforward, because my name was nowhere on the purchase. The LLC signed, Marcus penned the lines, the title clerk slid papers across the desk. Each page was thick with legalese, but all I saw was the lock on that gate snapping open. Within an hour, it was done. The deed was recorded. The clerk set a small ring of keys on the desk, a heavy silver set on a cracked leather fob. They clinked against the wood like a gavel. Marcus nudged them toward me. "They're yours," he said simply. I picked them up, turned the largest one in my hand. The weight was more than steel. It was leverage. For months, Bethany had dictated when and how I could access my own land. With one twist of this key, all that power shifted. We left through the back door, careful not to draw attention. Outside, Marcus clapped my shoulder. "Congratulations. You just bought yourself a gate and a fight." Back at the ranch, I parked by the road and walked the last stretch. The gate stood like it always had, steel bars, a padlock glinting in the sun, but now, it felt different. It was no longer an obstacle. It was mine. I slid the key into the lock. It turned smooth, almost eager. The shackle popped open with a sharp snap, final as a rifle bolt. I swung the gate wide, the hinges groaning, and stepped back. My herd, restless near the fence line, lifted their heads and moved toward the creek. Their hooves beat a steady rhythm as they pushed past me. water shimmering in the distance like salvation. For the first time in months, I felt the air in my chest ease. I had my land back. That feeling lasted exactly 2 days. On the third morning, a white SUV pulled up and parked in front of the gate. Bethany climbed out, heels clicking on the gravel, clipboard tucked like a weapon under her arm. 2 board members followed, stiff as soldiers. "Mr. Carter," she said coolly, "you appear to have accessed HOA property without authorization." I leaned on the gate, keys dangling from my finger. "This isn't HOA property anymore. I own this lot. County records will tell you the same." Her eyes narrowed. "That's impossible. The association had first right of refusal." "Maybe they did," I said evenly. "But they didn't use it. The seller took my offer. This gate is mine now. I've got the paperwork to prove it." One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. "Marge, if that's true..." She cut him off with a glare sharp enough to slice steel. "We'll see about that." She turned back to me, voice hard. "Don't think this is over. We'll challenge it." I let the silence stretch, then said, "Challenge whatever you want. In the meantime, you don't control this access anymore." "I do." They left without another word, but the air around me crackled. By that afternoon, I had 3 emails from the HOA demanding clarification of the gate's status. I forwarded them all to Tom, who replied with his usual dry calm. Let them make the next move. Word spread fast. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to before started stopping me at the feed store, at the gas station. Some whispered congratulations, like sharing state secrets. Others warned me Bethany was already scheming. Glenn came by with a case of beer and a grin so wide it nearly split his face. "Looks like you lit a fire," he said. "Good," I told him, sipping the cold beer on my porch. Maybe it's about time people stopped being afraid of her. But Bethany wasn't done. Not by a long shot. 2 mornings later, I was hauling feed when I saw her again, this time with 2 sheriff's deputies standing by her SUV. Their uniforms were sharp, badges catching the light. My gut tightened. I parked the truck and walked over, deed folder in hand. The taller deputy stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, we got a call about a property dispute. We're here to keep the peace." I handed him a copy of the deed. "There's no dispute. This lot, this gate's mine. Bought it fair and square." Bethany's voice cut sharp. "That property has always been under HOA management. He's interfering with community access." The deputy scanned the deed, nodded slowly. "It checks out. He owns it." Bethany's jaw locked. "We'll take this to court." "That's your right, ma'am," the deputy said. "But for now, there's no law being broken here." They left soon after, but not before half a dozen neighbors gathered at the roadside, murmuring. Some sided with me, others with Bethany. The division was no longer hidden, it was out in the open, like a fault line splitting the ground. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from Paula Green, the neighbor who had once warned me. "Be careful. Emergency board meeting Monday. Word is they're pushing for new rules, aimed at you." When Monday came, I walked into the clubhouse early. The room was packed, tension thick enough to choke. Bethany wasted no time. "As many of you know," she said, her voice carrying like a preacher's, "recent events have highlighted gaps in our ability to maintain community standards. The board proposes an amendment granting the HOA authority over any access points that serve more than one property." I raised my hand. "That's a pretty convenient amendment. Considering you're targeting one owner, this isn't about you, Mr. Carter," she said, though her eyes never left mine. "It's about the community as a whole." The back and forth turned sharp, heated. I laid out how the amendment would give the HOA sweeping power over land it didn't own. She countered with vague words about security and consistency. When the vote was called, the board split 3 in favor, 2 against. It still needed a majority of homeowners to pass. Afterward, several neighbors pulled me aside. One man, wiry and weathered, spoke quietly. "You're not the first she's tried to steal, but you might be the first who can beat her. Keep going." By midweek, the fight spilled onto social media. A local community page lit up with debates about the gate, the HOA, and whether Bethany had gone too far. I kept my posts, measured documents, facts, copies of the deed. But the comment sections told the truth. Neighbors were choosing sides like it was an election. And then came the strangest twist yet. Glenn showed up one evening with a plain envelope. Inside was an anonymous note. Check county filings tomorrow. The next morning, I drove into town and checked. My stomach dropped. Bethany had filed a notice of intent to purchase the strip of land running alongside my fence, an alternate access route. If she got it, she could bypass my gate completely. My leverage would evaporate. She wasn't just fighting me, she was trying to erase me. But I had fought harder battles against sharper enemies, and I wasn't about to let her win this one. The morning I found out about Bethany's filing, the sky was as clear as glass, and yet I felt the weight of a storm pressing down on me. She wanted to buy that strip of land and cut a road parallel to mine. If she succeeded, the gate I fought for, the key I held, would mean nothing. I drove straight to Tom Bird's office, the manila notice clenched in my hand. His office smelled faintly of old paper and stale coffee. The kind of place where battles were fought with pens instead of fists. I dropped the document on his desk. She's trying to box me in again, I said. If she gets that strip, she can bypass everything I just did. Tom adjusted his glasses, scanning the notice with a practiced calm. It's a clever move, he admitted, but it's not a done deal. That land's county-owned for now, earmarked for potential utility access. She'll have to jump through hoops to get it. We can slow her down, file objections, request reviews, lobby to keep it public. Do it, I said without hesitation. I don't care what it costs. Tom leaned back, studying me. She's banking on wearing you down, Malik. But the way you're digging in, I'd say you're wearing her down instead. I wanted to believe him, but Bethany wasn't the type to break easy. She was the type who fought until her nails bled, then borrowed someone else's hands to keep clawing. A week later, the story hit the front page of the Abilene Gazette. Rancher battles HOA over locked gate. The photo showed me leaning against the gate, arms crossed, eyes squinting into the sun. The article painted both sides: Bethany arguing community integrity, me insisting on property rights. Neutral words, but the picture told a different story. It showed a man standing his ground. The next morning at the feed store, people I barely knew came up to shake my hand. An older rancher clapped my shoulder. About time someone stood up to them, he said. Not everyone agreed. At the grocery store, a woman wearing a volunteer HOA badge hissed as she passed. You're making this harder for all of us. I didn't answer. At that point, the lines were drawn. Then came the annual community barbecue at the park. Normally, it was a day of smoked brisket, sweet tea, and laughter under oak trees. This year, it felt more like a political rally. Some neighbors openly wore Ridley's right buttons, Glenn's handiwork, no doubt. Others kept their distance, huddled under Bethany's shadow. I kept to the edges, plate in hand, but Bethany found me anyway. She strode over, heels clicking against the pavement. Two board members flanking her like bodyguards. Mr. Carter, she said smoothly, enjoying the event. Not as much as I'd enjoy getting my time back instead of fighting you, I replied. Keeping my tone steady, her smile tightened. You've made your point. But the HOA will continue to enforce its rules. You'd be wise to consider the long-term consequences of this. Publicity. I met her eyes, unflinching. You've been using fear to get your way for years. That ends now. People around us had gone quiet, listening. Bethany noticed and changed her tone, feigning conciliation. We can still work this out without dragging it through the courts. You had that chance months ago, I said. You chose the lock instead. Her mask cracked for just a moment. Then she turned and walked off, heels clicking like hammer blows. Later that night, Paula called me. She's furious, she said. You've taken the narrative from her. People aren't afraid to speak up anymore. Good, I told her. That's the real win. But the war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 2 days later, Tom called with news. Bethany had filed a lawsuit challenging my ownership of the gate lot, claiming procedural irregularities in the sale. It was her last, desperate attempt to claw back control. The summons arrived on a Friday afternoon. A deputy handed me the thick packet with a sympathetic look. "Guess you knew this was coming," he said. "Yeah," I answered quietly. I was expecting it. Inside, the language was densisements, covenants, undue influence. But I could see the truth between the lines. It was a bluff, one meant to intimidate me, drain me. Maybe push me to settle. Tom flipped through the paperwork the next morning. They've got nothing solid. The sale was clean. Title's clear. They're hoping you'll get tired of the fight. I'm not settling, I said. My voice was steady, but inside I felt the weight of every neighbor, every animal in my pasture, every dream I'd poured into this land. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. Over the next few weeks, the hearings became a spectacle. The county courthouse buzzed with reporters, curious locals, neighbors with folded arms and narrowed eyes. Some offered nods of encouragement, others muttered under their breath. Bethany always arrived early, immaculate in sharp suits, her bored allies flanking her. She didn't look at me once, but I could feel the heat of her disdain from across the room. During one recess, Paula approached me in the hallway. "Win or lose," she said softly, "you've already changed this place. People are questioning rules now, not just signing checks." I appreciated her words, but I didn't want a symbolic victory. I wanted a real one. That victory came on a bright Tuesday morning in early summer. The courtroom was packed. I sat at the table beside Tom, hands folded, heart steady. The judge, a stern woman with eyes like cold steel, flipped through the documents one last time. Then, she removed her glasses and spoke. "This court finds the purchase valid. The title stands. The HOA has no legal authority over the lot or the gate. Furthermore, the HOA will pay Mr. Carter's legal fees." Her gavel came down with a crack that echoed like thunder. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, a low murmur rippled through the crowd. Glenn grinned from the second row, giving me a thumbs up. Paula beamed. Even a few who'd stayed neutral came forward to shake my hand. Outside, the courthouse steps were flooded with cameras. I kept my comments brief. "This was never about offense," I said. "It was about principle. You don't let someone take what's yours just because they think they can. I hope this shows others that standing your ground matters." Back at the ranch, I drove out to the gate. My cattle grazed near the creek, tails swishing lazily, the water glinting in the afternoon sun. I leaned against the post, the breeze cool on my face. For the first time in months, there was no lock standing between me and my land. Glenn joined me a few minutes later, carrying 2 bottles of cold beer. He handed me one, and we clinked glass. "Feels good, doesn't it?" he said. "It's more than that," I told him. "It's knowing that if you stand up once, maybe you give others the courage to do the same." We sat in the shade, talking about cattle, weather, and the future. The fight had scarred me, sure, but it had also carved something deeper: respect, resilience, and community. Weeks later, I noticed the tone of HOA meetings had shifted. Board members spoke more carefully. Neighbors raised questions without glancing over their shoulders. The fear Bethany had cultivated for years was cracking. That, I realized, was the real win. The lesson was simple. The moment you stop letting someone else write the rules for your life, you start living on your own terms. So if you've got your own locked gate, whatever form it takes, don't assume you have to accept it. Ask questions. Push back. And if the fight is worth it, don't stop until the key is in your hand.